I want to tell you a little story about one of my all-time favorite tracks, and it's this 8-minute piece of music by Nils Frahm, and it's called Says. So this was 10 years ago, and I was looking for new music to listen to, and one of the things I found was Nils Fram's album Spaces, and Says was the first track on that album. I remember listening to it, and I was just absolutely taken away. It had this hypnotic rhythmic melody which repeated over and over, and then it was accompanied by piano that set the mood of the track. And then after about 5 minutes, the synth sound that plays the rhythmic melody suddenly shifts and creates this huge wave of sound that hits you. And then there are some fantastic little changes in the chord progression and the way the melody moves forward. And by the end of it, I was absolutely speechless. The track instantly felt like a classic. I knew I was going to listen to it forever. I then played it for one of my friends the next day, and he was also very impressed. And we were having this excited conversation about it. And then another friend of mine joined us, and we told him about it and played it for him. And then he loved it too. And we were three people with different tastes in music. And I remember at some point, maybe 2 years later, I was having this conversation with someone who I knew liked this track as well. And we were saying how if we were to rate our favorite tracks, Says would easily get a 10 out of 10. So then in 2019, the movie Ad Astra came out, and they used Says in the soundtrack. And the track is included in the official soundtrack of the movie. And then, funny enough, I was watching this episode of Hot Ones, I think around 2 years ago, and they had Salma Hayek on the show. And at some point during the interview, she was talking about one of her projects and how she listened to Says from Nils Frahm to get into a magical mindset that her character requires for that movie or project. I can think of many examples like this. Like over the years, I've heard about this track from different people, and I just think it's so admirable that so many people can resonate with an experimental track like this. And it is especially interesting to me because we're talking about a track that is 8 minutes long. And nowadays, I hear a lot of musicians talking about how short tracks get more plays on different platforms, and somehow this is becoming a new norm. And a lot of people are trying to make short tracks. And I think, at least based on my experience with this Nils Frahm track, that getting more plays in the short term doesn't necessarily mean you've made good music. And also, your track doesn't have to be short to become a trend. You can take your time with it and let the track set its own duration. At the end of the day, good music is good music, and people are going to recommend it to each other over time. And if it resonates with more and more people, then it's a piece of art that is very valuable. I understand that different genres require different approaches. Like when you make ambient music, you really want to set the mood and experiment with the sound and let the audience also take their time with you. But for example, if you make dubstep, your audience wants a very loud and very upbeat music, something that really makes them move with very few breaks in an entire set, like if it's a live show. And then the breaks shouldn't necessarily be that quiet or atmospheric. I absolutely understand that. And that's how it works. And you might say, well, of course, a Nils Frahm track was 8 minutes long, and his audience expects it from him. And when you're making ambient music, you can't do a whole lot in 2 minutes, but when you're making something upbeat, you can do plenty in 2 minutes. And that is true. But my argument is that specifically in the case of Says, many people didn't know the genre or the composer. They just somehow came across this track and gave it a shot and just found it interesting. And this is actually how people have been listening to music for the longest time. It used to be that you bought a physical copy of an album and just played it and found out. Like in a lot of cases, it would have been anything. And many people didn't necessarily have favorite genres. They usually had favorite artists. If you look at the greatest pieces of music in the last 60 years, they've come from all sorts of different genres, different artists, different durations, etc. So I just think it's absolutely unnecessary, if not hurtful, to limit the imagination of artists in order to set new standards that no one really asked for and are only going to serve the purpose of advertising. We've been seeing a kind of a new formula in the past few years, and it's be as trendy as possible, build a brand, and then after a few years, don't even make music anymore. Just be famous and sell other products. I mean, it's totally okay if an artist uses their brand to sell merch and stuff like that, especially because art is a risky career path. So you can use all the money you can get, basically. But this is becoming a completely different thing now. It seems like popular musicians are just becoming new brands, like for clothing and makeup and stuff like that. And I feel like we need to be careful not to glorify something that's going to take art and turn it into something that's only going to fulfill very temporary moods and only serve as a mean of advertising. We need art to inspire generations and to beautify life and culture. If you look at history, nobody really cares how someone spent their money like 1,000 years ago. But the buildings are there, the statues are there. In a lot of cases, we have written music from them, poetry, painting, and even the languages that we still speak. Like all the progress that humans have made throughout history has been thanks to science and art. Are we sure that we're going to just use one of those two things just to sell shoes better? Okay, maybe that one was a bit dramatic, but you know what I mean. Anyways, let's talk about it. If you're interested, I'm going to reply to all the comments. Let me know what you think.